here.
That's right.
Camouflaged.
I know, he's blending in.
Yep.
Hello again. I'm here with my mentor, Greg, and we want to reflect on our next to last video that's focused on standards 6, 7, and 8 of the in-task rubric. This reflection and debriefing will be a bit different than my others because, as I explained through email, I ran into some technological difficulties with my laptop. And through 3 attempts at recording what I felt was a very strong lesson to meet the criteria for success on this assessment, assignment, whatever, I just didn't have a video. And so Greg and I have discussed at length the content of this lesson because, you helped me realize during an observation, you saw a number of different things that were challenging, both in terms of the content and the skills that my students were either equipped with or choosing not to use, and the challenge of engagement, where my original attempt at a lesson was not fully informed. And so to remind the audience on camera here about what that meant, I created a lesson about data for predator versus prey and spreadsheet creation and manipulation and graphing, and my students just stone-faced me. And I realized very quickly, they don't have any skills related to this. So I scrapped the lesson, we did some review, and then I tried a separate one. The separate lesson was related to a new topic on communities and ecosystems and understanding how energy moves through different levels of a food chain or trophic levels. And I tried this content again, and as Greg was, you were making an observation in my class, what was meant to be a 2-class period endeavor turned out to be 6. And I was just interested if you would feel like commenting on some of the things that you observed from your mentor standpoint.
Well, because one thing is, they did have some conceptual background, and they did have ultimately the skills, but they didn't see the connection on how to synthesize all these different concepts together and how to apply the skills in analyzing. And so in terms of challenging, individual parts weren't necessarily the hard part, but what definitely was is how to use it all together or select the right evidence or select the right strategy. And so it ended up being just cumulatively too challenging. And so at least what you ended up being able to do is go through those skills, show how you think with think alouds, with modeling the process, what to actually do, and then if they could repeat that with new information but with the same context, or essentially same context, different information, then that is a demonstration of their learning. And sometimes we do need to take a step back, sure, and focus on the skills that they're lacking, because a lot of the student behavior or negative student behavior, I think, does come from them not understanding either the knowledge or the skill, and because they're just kids, they don't have the full language or manners to express what they don't know.
And it was interesting to see my frustrations from the front of class, not just with their misunderstandings, but also their disengagement when faced with challenges. And so what you'll notice as I go through and I continue to adapt the submission for this particular assignment, because I can't catch all of this on video, because what was meant again to be a 2 to 3 class period lesson, we spent 2 weeks on.
Yep.
But through your guidance and with especially the classes who had the most trouble, effectively what we ended up doing was to create step 1, step 2, to calculate a question, a numerical answer for an application-based problem in a spreadsheet, and I just gave them the key. Because effectively my assessment was going to be to check their spreadsheet.
Yep.
But because they were challenged, we created it together. And at your suggestion, very wisely, you said, why don't you take your extension question and turn it into another assessment? And so for this last week before Christmas break, my students have taken 3 full class periods, mind you, to answer 10 more questions related to this. But through collaboration and them being familiar with the concept, I was actually able this time to go through and visit small groups or individuals and use dry erase markers to write out problems on desk and erase it, or draw it on the board, or make analogies and effectively connect content knowledge that they already had to what they were calculating, and try, as you said, to show those connections across boundaries. And while it was challenging for them and very challenging for me, I believe that this is probably the best lesson that I've developed throughout the course of this year, because I was actually able, as the rubric says, to not just provide modifications and accommodations and allow students to understand that you can answer a question multiple ways. It's the process that matters. This was a case study in how to take real-time data and do something with it. And while it didn't work as well as it originally, I think the end result, through reflection and my strategies and consulting with you about some things, Standard 6, I think, was checked off quite nicely.
Because you were able to get meaningful data about their engagement over those first several lessons, but it wasn't actually very informative about what they knew and what they were able to do. And so that's when I identified that you showing essentially some of your frustration, it helped you to really communicate your values with why this is important to learn, and give them reasons to care. Because with the IB, it's just so much information and so much to cover that you can't really fully develop something or communicate that passion or communicate the reasons why it's important to care about. But I think that was a good opportunity to share your values and make it clear, this is foundational for everything else that we look at with atmospheric systems or aquatic systems, and I think that it reiterates some of those expectations that sometimes get lost through the course of things, particularly when group work becomes game time, and being able to identify that and manage it. And, from all of the things that you said, I think that this experience helped me to plan more effectively. Again, knowing at a point where time management stops being as important as getting the objective accomplished, regardless of the time sacrificed to do it. But I was able to go through and draw on that knowledge that I was gaining, not just from prior experience, but in real time in class, and try to make it a more logical sequence and say, stop being so concerned about the end result and follow the steps to get there. Make your units correct. Make your math that you've done since elementary school connect to something. And while it was a very big challenge for them, I do think that it was successful in helping them understand a little bit better why we go through and do this. And it did require multiple instructional strategies. I exhausted effectively every technique that I know to explain something. And as we discussed in our initial reflection, the easiest thing for me to do was to talk about energy transfer in terms of dollars. Of all of the things that I could have thought to do, the easiest one would be to talk about money, and it never crossed my mind. But again, it ultimately ended up being incredibly effective. So, asking those questions to stimulate, growth or deepening or extending knowledge. I think that the way that those questions in the both assessments were aligned, that built on one another, maybe not verbally directly in the assessment, but the instructions allowed for those conversations to happen through different contexts. Yeah.
Right. And my students developed some vocabulary related to aquatic and marine ecosystems, in the process. So while it may not have been as visible directly, I think that this is something that, as I go to develop a portfolio, I think this is something that I would include in it, because I've been able to troubleshoot a lot of things with your support, directly and in time. And so that even though I did this same activity last year with a group that was more adept at spreadsheet use, this lesson now is 20 times better because of it. So.
And it's a great way to also, even if it won't necessarily impact this group of students, it does help with making predictions in the future of what kind of questions or misconceptions our students going to have, and how can I plan that into my lesson so that when it comes up, I can respond quickly and then get us back into that pathway towards our end goal.
Yeah, and you know, and it's funny that you say that, because my last comment before we finish, and Merry Christmas, by the way,
Oh yeah, Merry Christmas.
is that, you know, the time management in terms of classroom management and transitions has been a real struggle of mine. And learning how these types of assessments allow you to remove the necessity for transitions per se in this project-based setting, it really does prove the point that allowing that student-centered research approach and them asking the questions and you guiding it, it doesn't remove that element of management, but it makes it a lot less important.
Yeah.
And as I move forward, you know, your guidance in terms of trying to flip the lesson style more towards that is something that I look forward to continuing to try to develop, both, you know, for the rest of this grading period, but throughout the rest of the year, because I think that it deepens the student understanding of the content knowledge at the same time.
Absolutely.
So again, I thank you for helping me through this and being patient enough to do a 15-minute reflection as opposed to a 5-minute one before we go on vacation.
Not a
But
problem.
signing off from Ecuador, thank you very much.
Ciao, ciao.